Hi, I'm Gemma Monaghan, National Head of R&D here at Azets, and I am joined by my colleague Kirsty Murray, our corporate tax partner and specialist in creative reliefs. And today we are going to be discussing R&D, patent box, and some of the creative reliefs available to the industries. These are massively important innovation reliefs and can massively boost growth and fuel cash into organisations. However, as ever, with HMRC, things are not straightforward. And Kirsty and I are going to take you through some of the nuances today.
So rather than going through all the nuances of the rules, we're going to take two clients as an example. We've got one subsea engineering business, and then we've got a video games company.
Will we kick off with our subsea client based up in Aberdeen? So I think one of the first things for them that we had to think about, Kirsty, was the fact of which scheme they were claiming under. Given that it was a 31 March 25 year end, they could be falling under the merged scheme or equally an R&D intensive scheme that HMRC introduced. However, taking a step back, along with looking at that, HMRC introduced legislation around who owns the R&D. So we got new legislation and guidance around subcontracted R&D after all of the tribunals and HMRC scrutiny in this area. So it was a bit of a navigation for this client in terms of which scheme and whether they actually had the right to claim the R&D. And I think these two things, along with whether they're project qualified, was kind of the starting point for us in terms of an advisory perspective.
Okay, and in terms of which scheme and whether the project qualifies, what else do you have to consider?
I think some of the things that the industry falls down on at the minute are all of the kind of extra little things that HMRC have introduced, many of them with good intention. One of them being the additional information form, which needs to be submitted before a company's tax return. We can see that sometimes these are not submitted by either claimants or other advisors, or sometimes there's a little thing wrong in them, which means that the claim is rejected and almost it needs to be resubmitted to HMRC. So I think a few of the other things that they fall down on is whether the additional information form is actually submitted. We've seen that from companies trying to claim themselves or use other advisors, is that it's not either submitted ahead of the company's tax return or actually there's a small error leading to the rejection of the claim. I think the other thing, now that there's the intensive scheme introduced, is the actual calculation of whether the company's R&D intensive or not. It's not a straight numerator denominator, again, as you would like to expect from HMRC. There's quite a nuance in the calculation.
So being knowledge intensive is also something we would consider in terms of looking at EIS. But before I get into that, let me just tell you a little bit about EIS. So EIS is a tax relief available to individuals who invest in businesses by the issue of new shares. And it is targeted at early stage, high growth businesses. Because of the risks involved, the individuals will receive a 30% income tax relief on the amount that they invest. And also, when the company hopefully succeeds, they will have no capital gains tax to pay on an exit. So it's a really valuable relief for these individuals, and also very valuable for the companies receiving the money. But where we've got a knowledge-intensive company, so that is broadly one which is spending a high proportion of its costs on research and development and having a highly skilled workforce, so similar to the R&D rules, then the rules are slightly relaxed for EIS. So normally with a regular business, they need to receive EIS investment within the first 7 years, whereas with a knowledge-intensive business, they've got up to 10 years to receive the investment. And HMRC really recognises that these types of businesses need longer and more money to scale and grow.
And you mentioned EIS there, but some of our clients, obviously, SCIS, is that similar? Are there differences that kind of the industry needs to be aware of?
Yes, so EIS is very similar. It's, I would say, the little sister to EIS. So it's available for the really early stage businesses in the first 3 years of trading. And the amount that can be attracted under that scheme is only £250,000. So it is a kind of the initial stepping stone, and companies therefore tend to move into EIS later on.
And do you have to do an advance assurance? Do you have to do it beforehand? Is this something that's done retrospectively?
Yes, no, advance assurance isn't necessary, but we find that investors want this. The companies apply to HMRC for advance assurance, and that effectively confirms that the company is eligible. So yes, there is an advance assurance process, and we find that investors want this before they make the investment. So it's the company that would make the application to ensure that they are eligible. and then the investors would make the investment afterwards.
So similar, not the exact same from an R&D perspective. You may or may not be aware, HMRC have now introduced a requirement for a pre-notification. So an advisor or a claimant company can make that to HMRC. It's essentially a bit of a forewarning of, I'm about to claim R&D tax relief on this claim period, but there are some kind of tricky things in determining whether a company actually needs to make the pre-notification and whether they actually have a valid historical claim.
And what would constitute a valid claim?
So essentially one where a company has made it within a particular pre-notification window, but in theory it typically needs to be done within the company's original tax return. If it's been amended to include the R&D claim, that might not actually count as a valid claim. I think with everything going on from an R&D perspective and inquiries as well, companies need to be very careful that if they have made a single claim and it goes into an inquiry, whether that actually counts towards being a valid claim. Now, in discussions with HMRC, they absolutely still see that as a valid claim up until the point that they've made the decision on that inquiry. They haven't put that into guidance or legislation or writing as yet, so that's something the industry's waiting on.
And there's obviously been so many inquiries because there's been so much fraud in the industry. Are these inquiries resolving this issue?
So absolutely, we can see through the numbers that how HMRC quantify fraud and error, it's obviously going in the right direction. The approach that they've taken, I suppose, historically has been quite scattergun. They opened up a high volume of inquiries that targeted, in many instances, small, medium enterprises, which meant there was a bit of a collateral damage. Now, it's been going on for about 2.5 years now. We have seen over the last 12 months, we've seen more engagement from HMRC in terms of calls with the taxpayer. We have seen more inquiries get resolved, and we've seen a more target approach whenever it comes to opening up the inquiries. So it's very much going in the right direction, both in terms of HMRC's approach and also the outcome in terms of which companies are claiming and getting access to the fantastic benefit.
So back to our client, you mentioned enhanced R&D support. Does this apply here?
So in theory, if the client had been loss-making, it would have, they actually meet the threshold for being R&D intensive, which for the current claim period is 30%. They're 56%, where they spend 56% of their expenditure on research and development qualifying activities. However, as I mentioned back at the start, we actually also help this client with Patent Box. In order to gain access to the Patent Box relief, you need to be in a profit-making position because it reduces your corporation tax from 25 to 10%. So in theory, if the client had been a loss-making SME, yes, they'd absolutely qualify. However, in this instance, we were able to support them with Patent Box as well.
And with the Patent Box, there seems to be a sort of lack of uptake. Do you know why that is?
That's actually a really interesting question. I think actually in particular in Scotland, there's actually a lower uptake than across the UK as well. I think a lot of it comes down to knowledge and also potential restrictive costs, or at least the presumption that there's restrictive costs along with, I suppose, accessing IP in terms of patents. I've been working very closely with a number of kind of IP lawyers and patent attorneys in terms of educating client bases, not only about the importance of the IP strategy, but also around the costs associated with that journey, and then what potential reliefs can come as a result of it. So while there might be a little bit of an upfront sunk cost from a company's perspective, the longer term benefits of accessing that Patent Box are absolutely phenomenal. So why don't we move on to our second client that we've been supporting around, they have been developing an online fantasy video games, and you've been supporting them with their reliefs. Is it all types of video games companies that benefit from that relief?
So we have to have a UK production company, and it's not HMRC that decide whether the game is eligible. It's the British Film Institute. So before a claim is submitted to HMRC, the company needs to apply to the BFI to get this British certificate, and that can be either an interim certificate or a final certificate. And I think that actually gives some assurance to the companies, because really then what HMRC are looking at is more about, are the costs eligible, are the costs incurred in the UK, rather than does the game qualify in the first place.
And I think over the last few years, what we've seen is, from an R&D perspective, the benefit shrinking for SMEs, while kind of Patent Box has improved historically. What does it look like in terms of benefit for these creative sectors at the minute?
So we've seen a slight increase in the benefits. We've gone from the video games tax relief to VGEC, or video games expenditure credit. So we've now got a 34% above the line credit. So after you deduct tax, that works out about 20.4%. So that is marginally better than it was under the old rules. But we are seeing much more focus on costs being incurred in the UK. And so much so that a lot of the industry bodies are calling for increased training and provision of staff in the UK. They're actually wanting a new GCSE based on creative industries.
We talked a little bit about R&D and inquiries because that's been such a big focus. Do you see the same on the creative side of things, either kind of within the video game sector, but equally some of the other creative reliefs that you support on?
Yeah, for quite a long time we've had really no inquiries, partly I think because there is things like the BFI certificate that needs completed in advance. After the introduction of the additional information form, we have seen definitely more questions from HMRC, and claims are taking longer to approve. They're taking about 12 weeks to approve a claim, and we're getting questions about whether are the costs paid for within 4 months of the year end, and are the costs incurred in the UK.
Hopefully it doesn't turn into what the R&D tax relief industry turned into, but it's understandable that with an increase in claim numbers and volume, HMRC want to make sure that the right people are claiming the right amount of reliefs.
Yes.
So today we focused on a specific client example on our online fantasy video games developer. Are there other types of relief available for the creative sectors?
Yeah, there are a number of tax reliefs. They are all corporation tax reliefs, but there's a film tax relief, there's a theatre tax relief, there's orchestra, there's museums and galleries tax reliefs, and then the TV tax reliefs. We've got individual fact sheets on each of them, and that will go through all the specific conditions.
Well, Kirsty, thanks very much for your time today, and thanks very much for your very insightful thoughts on both R&D, patent box and creative reliefs. Hopefully today you'll be able to see that while these incentives are a fantastic possibility for companies, they are nuanced, they are complex, and actually looking at them as an integrated package across other growth strategies are very important. If you'd like to speak to anyone further about any of these reliefs, please look at our website, contact myself or Kirsty, or speak to your Azets advisor.